Existentialism by me, Kai Spin. Historical context. Existentialism really took off just after the Second World War. Fear had been spread across the Western world in the form of bloody invasions, Nazi death camps, and nukes. The transcendental era came to a close as anxiety, alienation, boredom, and meaningless became the predominant feelings of Western society. Religion began to give way to secularity and science, and the world as a whole began to look a lot more like the version of society we're used to seeing today. As you'll see when I describe the basic tenets of existentialism, these things, particularly the feelings and shifts within society, are the primary structures which existentialism is built upon. Associated philosophers. For this project, I will only be discussing 5 of the primary existentialist philosophers: Jean-Paul Sartre, Simone de Beauvoir, Soren Kierkegaard, Friedrich Nietzsche, and Albert Camus. 3 of these 5 philosophers, Sartre, de Beauvoir, and Camus, were French people who more openly identified with the existentialist movement, and Sartre is, in fact, regarded in the public consciousness as the central figure of existentialism. Much of his, de Beauvoir, and Camus's work came from the early to mid-20th century, and together these 3 were the frontrunners of the French branch of the existential movement. This branch of existentialism, which took place almost entirely after the Second World War, is the most popular part of the movement, as it took place around the same time the existential movement as a whole found its success and produced some of the most influential existentialists. Although the French branch of existential philosophy was quite influential, it wasn't the actual beginning of the existential movement. Soren Kierkegaard, a Danish philosopher, is the man who is largely regarded as the father of existentialism. Friedrich Nietzsche was also an extremely influential existential philosopher. Throughout his lifetime, he developed some of the pivotal ideas of existential philosophy, most outstandingly nihilism. Basic tenets. There are, according to Kevin Ho, 6 basic tenets of existentialism: nihilism, engagement versus attachment, existence precedes essence, freedom, authenticity, and ethics. Many of these specific ideas are derived from Sartre's works, which compile the core concepts of existentialism. The condition of nihilism involves a shocking recognition that there is no overarching reason, order, or purpose to our existence, that it is all fundamentally meaningless and absurd. It is the idea of moving away from the structures of religion and transcendentalism and experiencing the feelings of anxiety and forlornness of the modern age. The introduction of nihilism is what brought about the concept of existentialism as an intellectual movement. Engagement versus detachment is, simply, the idea that one cannot be detached from the prejudices of existence. Existence precedes essence is a term which comes directly from one of Sartre's books. It suggests that there is no pre-given or essential nature that determines us, meaning we are always working on building ourselves up through the choices we make and the actions we take. Freedom, when it comes to existentialism, is the idea that every person has full responsibility for their actions and their purpose. Each individual is fully responsible for who they are. For example, if a child seems to inherently be nervous, it is, according to existentialism, not due to their upbringing or genetic makeup, but due to the choices they made and the actions they took throughout their life. Authenticity, to the existentialist, is challenging the idea of conformity. To be authentic is to not be fearful of the ability to determine one's purpose and is essentially the idea of launching oneself into existentialism. The idea of ethics builds primarily upon the existentialist idea of freedom. It is, in short, the concept of sharing freedom. It binds those who desire this structure to helping others understand this concept, the idea being that one's freedom depends entirely on the freedom of others, and that freedom of others depends on ours. Texts. There are no unifying doctrines for existentialism. Rather, the texts of this movement are a collection of outstanding works by the philosophers associated with existentialism. I will be focusing on only a few existentialist works in order to save time. The first work I explored was Kierkegaard's Fear and Trembling. This is a short book which, in a slightly un-existentialist manner, retells the biblical story of Abraham's attempted sacrifice of his son Isaac. In this story, God asks Abraham to sacrifice his only son, and, after allowing Abraham to nearly complete the task he gave him, God intervenes and saves Isaac. Kierkegaard continues to ask questions about the morality and ethics of Abraham. He questions if Abraham made the right decision to obey God and explores the idea of Abraham following his morals and choosing to spare the life of his son. The basic tenets which I described previously came after Kierkegaard's time, so they are not explicitly mentioned in Fear and Trembling. However, these 2 questions, along with the others posed by Kierkegaard in the book, do have a strong connection to the basic ideas of existentialism, as they question whether or not Abraham should have abided by the wishes of the overarching power of God. The second and final text I chose to explore was The Gay Science by Friedrich Nietzsche. This book is a collection of short stories whose common goal it is to erect a new image and ideal of the free spirit. One of the most notable stories in the book is The Madman. This story explores, again, many of the basic tenets of existentialism, most outstandingly, nihilism. It describes a madman screaming at people, first asking, "Whither is God?" then telling the people that they have killed the man he is searching for. He questions the people he is speaking to, asking them about their lives now that God is dead, and, upon not getting response, he leaves the room saying that he has come too early and that this tremendous event is still on its way. Nietzsche then describes the madman venturing into several churches to pose similar questions to the priests. The people in this story represent the majority of Westerners at the time existentialism began. They are confused by the consequences of actions they had taken, and the madman seems to represent Nietzsche and other existential philosophers. They may seem mad, but they're trying to share with the world the questions which they now need to face without their fate being predetermined by an overarching power. Influence. The existential movement, interestingly enough, had less of an impact on philosophy than it did on how people view the human condition. Even today, the ideas posed by existentialist philosophers are overarching concepts shared by many people within Western society and are the reasons for many people's success. For example, the existentialist idea of freedom, or forging one's own path, is one of the primary reasons for success within American society. Uniqueness is desirable because that's what has been found by many to be one of the keys to success. However, existentialism has also been avoided by many, as it is a slightly less optimistic way of thinking than what most people prefer, and it counters the idea of religion. While religion is a far less important part of many people's lives now than it was centuries ago, it is still a popular practice. Since one of the most fundamental ideas of existentialism is moving away from overarching powers, such as God, it is not surprising that those who put their faith in an overarching power prefer to avoid existentialism as a whole. Works cited. Thank you.